Welcome to projecting your alternate assessment rates. So today we're going to talk a little bit to you on how you can calculate that 1% participation rate, give you some resources, and hopefully answer some questions around what this looks like in your LEA. So really quickly, we wanted to review the rule of where the new participation rate for alternate assessments has come in. So ESSA has changed what we were supposed to do with that participation calculation. And for each subject that your students are assessed in an alternate assessment, ELA, math, and science, we are looking at the number of students that are participating in the alternate assessments, where the previous rule and calculation was based upon the number of those students who were proficient in alternate assessments. And so that rule has changed where a state can only have 1% of our total students test in an alternate assessment. And then looking at that calculation rule, so we will look at that in both math, science, and ELA, all areas. And the data is based upon EDFACS reports, 185, 188, and 189. And Malia will talk a little bit more about that momentarily. And it's really important to note that what we report to OSEP is just grades 3 through 8 and 10. For ELA and math, and then science is grades 4 through 8 and 10. So we don't include grade 9 and 11 in those calculations. And when looking at how do I make this calculation, the numerator is going to be the number of students that actually took an alternate assessment, and it's going to be over all of the students that actually tested in the LEA. So it includes those that took the SAGE test and the alternate test. So some of the students that are not included in this calculation would be opt-out. They're not included in there, and first-year English learner students are not included for ELA in this calculation.
Okay, hi, this is Malia. I'm going to talk about some resources that we have available in the Data Gateway to help you identify which of your students are going to be included in your numerator. So the numerator, you're going to go into the Data Gateway or UTREX report that shows your SCRAM students who are reported as 1%. And you're going to use that data to estimate your numerator, and then also to monitor your data and make sure that students are appropriately identified for alternate assessments. So first of all, make sure you have Data Gateway access. If you're the special ed director, you should have access to Data Gateway as a special ed LEA user. And this type of account allows you access to see student level special ed data in the Data Gateway. And if you need to get that access, you're going to talk to your Data Gateway administrator for your LEA. So to get to that, the Data Gateway, you can either navigate there with this URL. It's datagateway.schools.utah.gov, or you can get there from the USBE homepage, which is schools.utah.gov, and you'll click on the Data Gateway link. And once you're on the Data Gateway, the first page that pops up, you'll see a login link in the upper right hand corner. Click on that to log in. There's also a little question mark icon on the red bar on the right side, and that has some help resources available for you. We also have some training resources on this first page. If you click on where it says Data Gateway Training, it'll open up a menu with some training resources. Once you're logged in, you'll have a My Tools menu that appears on the red bar. When you click on the My Tools bar, you'll see the reports that are available to you in Data Gateway. Those are going to vary depending on which type of user account you have. So This right here is showing what the menu looks like for someone who has a special ed LEA user account as well as an assessment LEA user account. So it's showing assessment reports in addition to the special ed reports. So you might have access to that as well depending on your role within your LEA. Or you may just see the special ed reports. The report that we're looking for today, you're going to find by clicking on UTREX Special Education Reports under that Special Education header. Once you're on that page with the UTREX Special Education Reports, it'll bring you to this list of reports that are kind of listed out by when it's most important to be looking at these reports, and you should be making copies of the reports during those data upload periods. So the report we're going to use to help you identify your 1% students is a report that's used during the December upload period. That's the Scram CCW detail report. It's going to show student level data for every student who has a Scram record from your LEA. This here, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, this here is actually a Excel document that you can download. You can open it up and use it, and it's going to give examples of how you can use your Scram CCW report to figure out what your numerator counts should be for each subject area: English, language arts, math, and science. So I'm going to walk you through the steps of how to open up this report from this PowerPoint. So you're going to want to right-click on the gray area of this report, and then you're going to scroll down to where it says Worksheet Object, and you're going to choose Open. And that opens this as an Excel worksheet. You can see that this Excel worksheet has 3 tabs. I've downloaded the data for just an example LEA, but then I blanked out all the names and I added a whole bunch of fake information. So none of this is real information. This is all made up to give you some different scenarios of how you can go through and look at the students, look at the different rows of data in this report, and try to figure out what your numerator is going to be for your alternate assessment 1% calculation. So that's the tab with the data. Then we have a tab to walk you through some steps in how to identify what your numerator is going to be. And then for the denominator, unfortunately, this Scram CCW report isn't going to help you get your denominator, and we don't really have a report in Data Gateway that will help you get that information in advance. You might work with your assessment director or an IT person at your LEA to try to determine or estimate the number of students that you're expecting to have in your denominator for each of the subject areas. And here's some of the steps that you'll look at in trying to figure out what your denominator is going to be. First of all, how many distinct students are there in your school in the eligible grade levels? Of those, how many are you expecting to take a test? Are any of those students English language learners who won't be expected to take a test? Are any of those opted out students? Okay, and now back to the meat of this webinar is identifying the students in your 1% calculation. So first step is to see how many distinct students are there in your LEA. So in the Scram CCW detail report, you might have some students who are included in the report with more than one row of data. So for example, these first two rows, student A has two different rows of data. This student, if you look at the school entry date, is the same. That's when the student entered your school. But then if you look at the Scram entry and exit dates, you can see that this student had a Scram record that went from August 24th to October 2nd, and then had a new Scram record that started on October 3rd. So you want to be careful and make sure you don't accidentally include students more than once in your numerator. So over here in the hints, this will help you with this. If a student's IEP changed, they have more than one Scram record. So if you want to look for students with duplicates, filter on the Scram exit date and Scram entry date columns to identify the record that will be active during the testing window. So basically, if a student's Scram record was closed already, such as this student whose record was closed on October 2nd, you're not expecting this student to take a test because that record isn't active during the testing window. So we can filter out that record. Let's see. So we want to just keep the blanks here. Okay. And oops. I think I wanted to keep, I just wanted to get rid of that record, that student there. Okay, so that gives us 20 students here that we're starting out with as our estimate for our numerator. Next step, students in reported grades. So the EdFacts files that the 1% calculation is based off of only includes a subset of grade levels. In high school, we don't look at the 9th or 11th grade tests. So next we'll filter out the grade levels that aren't included. And for this we'll have to kind of pay attention to two different sets of grade levels because the science isn't tested in 3rd grade. So if we filter out grade 10 and grade 9, which aren't tested for language arts or math, that gives us 18 students. So our numerator now, our estimate is 18. Oh, I apologize. We keep grade 10 in. I meant to. We don't have any 11th graders, so I don't need to filter out grade 11. So it's only grade 9 we're filtering out, 19 students. And then for science, we filter out grade 3, and that's 16 students for science. Now we look, of these special ed students, how many of them are identified as 1%? So we have that as a column here. The students with a 0 means no, not identified as 1%, and the 1 means yes, identified as 1%. So we're going to filter out the zeros. And it's down to 4 students. Remember, we're still filtering out grade 3 for science. So 4 students is the estimated numerator. And were there any 3rd graders? No, there were no 3rd graders who are 1%. So the numerator now, estimate is now the same, again, for all 3 test subjects. Okay, and now here's where kind of more of a monitoring element comes in. Students who are identified as 1% who have a disability type of SL or CD, you'll want to look over those students closely to make sure that they were correctly identified as 1%. So we're going to look at the disability type, and we do have a student whose disability type is SL. So you want to look at that student's IEP and make sure that that student belongs in the numerator count, that they should actually be taking a 1% or an alternate assessment. So for now, we will put a question mark as to whether your numerator is still 4. Maybe if the student was incorrectly identified, your numerator should actually be 3.
So, and then with that, when looking at monitoring, and we at USBE have the obligation to be monitoring this as well. So those will be how we kind of identify specific schools or students that we might want to go observe for that monitoring component is kind of looking at students that are marked 1% that are specific learning disabled or have a communication disorder that are marked to take that alternate assessment.
Okay, so now the numerator estimate, I just put a question mark next to it because that's something that you would have to determine by looking more closely at the student records. The next step is, are the students going to be expected to test? So exclude any students who exited your LEA prior to the testing window. So we'll filter on the school exit date and the SCRAM exit date columns. So school exit date, we had a student here who exited on January 5th. So that means that that student's not going to be enrolled in your LEA as of the testing window. So let's filter that student out of the data set. And now we are down to 3 students as potentially being in your numerator for the 1% calculation. Next step, we want to see if there are any students who are English learners who are attending school in the U.S. for the first year. Unfortunately, this is something that we don't have this level of detail in this report. So to get that information, you'll have to work with your data gateway administrator or your UTREX person or your assessment director. Or perhaps you are all those things and you know where to get that data from a different report or directly out of that student's record in the SIS. And finally, the last step is you want to look at these students and see if any of these students have been parentally excluded from testing. So if you look at this list of students, student B, I, and J, do you know if any of them have been parentally excluded, or work with someone in your LEA who would have that information to find out if you need to adjust your numerator to exclude students who've been parentally excluded. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tracy. Oh, actually, here were some ideas of where you might get your LEA, your denominator, from some of the other reports in UTREX and Data Gateway that your Data Gateway administrator or your UTREX person would have access to.
So with that, that is how we are looking at that calculation, deciding, how many LEAs tested over that 1% of the student population. So if you have any further questions around how to calculate that, any questions around looking at those participation guidelines or qualifying a student, you can always email myself at tracy.gooley@schools.utah.gov. And if you have any questions around the actual data and calculations, you can email Malia at malia.mcveya@schools.utah.gov. And that concludes our recording today. Thank you.
Thanks.